Well, I'll try again then. So good morning, everybody. So apologies for everybody else is here. No new declarations of interest. So the first item is the minutes of our last meeting. Does anybody have any matters of accuracy they wish to correct? Or any matters arising from the minutes from last time? No? No. In that case, we can move on. Minutes of the pension committee meeting. We're just simply asked to note those or raise any questions. Have we got any questions on the minutes? Pages 7 to 16 of the pack. Does anyone have any questions or issues they wish to raise on the minutes of the pension fund committee?
Just to say, I was there as an observer, and certainly the minutes accord with what I recall.
Okay, thank you. Nothing else on the minutes? In that case, Matthew, can you take us through the quarterly update, please, starting on page 17 of the pack?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I will do. So what we'll do again is maybe break this down into the three separate sections: funding, investments, and then around governance and operations, and just and stop through each parts of those in respect of questions. As the Chair said, the report starts on page 17 and the recommendations are on page 26. It also captures the recommendations and the review that was undertaken by committee as well. And we'll get to obviously one of the key items, which is the audit findings report within there. So starting with funding on page 17 and 18 of your packs, the fund remains in a healthy position. Asset value is again above the 3 billion mark on that side, and on a basis of rolling forward from the last valuation in March 2022, the overall funding position of the entire fund is looking healthy in terms of the funding level now being recorded at about 151% compared to the 110% it was in March 2022. Biggest driver for that is actually the valuation on your liabilities, on the fund's liabilities. In other words, how much money do we need to hold today to actually pay those future liabilities? And obviously with what's happened within the interest rates, because that is one of the key drivers on that side, the amount of money that we need to hold with interest rates at now the levels that they are would obviously be less. So as you can see, where you look at the total liabilities of the fund, the notional value has dropped from 2.83 to 2.06 billion in terms of those liabilities. The actuary will stress caution with regard to these, as we know interest rates at this moment in time are potentially, and we say potentially because we don't know what normal looks like, are potentially overinflated at this time to deal with the inflationary pressures that we have. Ultimately, what we do need to see is what interest rates will normalise to. I think previously people have always said normal, or it feels like there's a generation that feels interest rate normalisation is at zero, but I don't think over longer generations that is the case, that interest rates will be at zero. And I think the markets are pricing in that there will be interest rates, but at what level it will be above zero, but at what level those things will come through. So the actuary does provide caution for employers around making decisions at this point in time with regard to pensions, but it does give us the opportunity to discuss issues with employers that may be on a trajectory for exit, and having those dialogues with those employers around that current funding levels and their funding positions. I'll stop at that point, Sean, and see if there's any particular questions with regard to where the fund is in terms of its funding and its position at this time.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Any questions on funding?
No, very clear to me.
Okay. So I'll move on to investment then. Just to kind of briefly highlight again, obviously, what committee received during that period of time. So on page 19 of your reports gives an indication of where we are with investment at this moment in time. Over the quarter, the fund did produce a positive return of 1.5%. That was actually equal to its benchmark. So the expectation was 1.5 from the strategic benchmark, and that was what was achieved. But importantly, over the 3 years, we are looking at a 6% annualized return, which is slightly ahead of the benchmark, but importantly is also ahead of the expected rate of return that the actuary is assuming within their long-term funding liabilities. So that in itself is a positive performance from that side. We, as a fund, also, the board may recall, we also participate in LGPS investment performance benchmarking. So there is a report and the appendices, I think it's appendix 3 of your report gives some more clarity around the benchmarking. So there's a number of funds, 63 of the LGPS funds, so not all LGPS funds partake in it, and combining about just under 250 billion pounds worth of assets, look to benchmark their performance against each other. I always personally exercise caution with regard to these results and league tables in this particular guys, because what you need to remember is that each fund has potentially a different demographic makeup of their fund. They have a different liability profile of their particular fund, so their investment strategies will be set to actually meet their individual requirements. And obviously those strategic asset allocations will differ in terms of performance, whether or not you are a higher degree of equity exposure versus private markets. But what it does do, it gives a very good benchmark of what other funds are doing, because we are similar and operate in a similar basis, to actually see where you're actually, are you an outlier, or where do you sit in terms of that spectrum? So it does help in terms of informing that move forward. In terms of the 1 year performance, the fund at -2% was below the universe average of 1.6, but not materially below, on that side. And I think over the longer term, the 3 year, we were slightly above that universe average in terms of that performance. Just looking at where we were, and I know we always look with interest of where we are with our certain colleagues within the Brunel Partnership. Only 5 Brunel Partnership funds actually undertake the benchmarking. We were third out of those 5. We won't say who was top to the bottom, but the results of the Brunel Partnership range from about -1%, so you could see everyone was in that minus territory, down to about just over -7%. So our -2% was more towards the top of the range rather than the bottom of the range of our colleagues within Brunel, if we do like to actually look and compare ourselves with our very close working partners and our neighbours on that side of things. I will stop there and see if there's any particular questions on that side, Sean, if I may.
Any questions, Matthew, on the figures he's just presented?
Just a question as to, is there any particular area of our fund that produced that negative result? I mean, is it something to do with, I don't know, do you think the politics or particular sector that produced that result?
So our result in comparison, so as a fund, we are slightly higher in terms of our equity exposure compared to the majority of LGPS funds. So the driver of performance over the previous 12 months has predominantly been private markets. However, what we would say with regard to that, so your private markets, things like your private equity, private debt, and even to a degree property within that spectrum in your infrastructure assets, where you have seen potentially a repricing because of the geopolitics that is in there, and the markets and the inflation running, that actually gets priced in very quickly into your equity markets. There is always a potential time lag in terms of the pricing of real assets. So, you know, you're seeing now property values, you know, now as a decline, whereas maybe 8, 9, 10 months ago, when that first issues happened with inflation, it wasn't really priced in at that point. So what you've actually got from a fund is, because we are more underweight private markets compared to other funds, as in investments in the ground, where, you know, our performance, more volatility we have as a particular fund, but also that was the real driver for that slight underperformance. It's not material, the difference, and actually the allocations that has been made to private markets will bring us in line with the majority of funds in terms of the exposure to those private markets, in terms of infrastructure, private debt. The only issue you have, it takes time to actually get those investments into the ground. So even if you commit £100 million to a private markets, it's not like with equities, you could go and buy those shares tomorrow and have £100 million worth of exposure tomorrow. It takes time to actually deal with that. So that was the key driver of that performance in comparison to the majority. We understand it, but actually we're not an outlier on there. And actually the longer term strategy is moving more into that private markets and that balance that's comparable with the majority of funds in there as well. That helps. And actually, if I follow on to page 20, we talk about responsible investment on that side. Obviously, we're still awaiting the response from the government around the TCFD, the Task Force for Climate Financial Disclosures regulations to come through. We had a consultation. We've responded to that consultation, and we're awaiting the outcomes of that from government. I'm not sure where we will be, but I think there is a much held belief that actually as a fund we are going to proceed with looking at enhancing our reporting and increasing our reporting in line with what we believe TCFD requirements will be, you know, for 2023-24. So that will come through into the next annual report, regardless of whether or not regulations have been set. A number of LGPS funds have already started to adopt that. It is happening in the private sector. They already have regulation within this particular area. We are not expecting that regulation to be dissimilar to what's in the private in the private fund area. So I think that progress will be made in that side. And obviously, just to that point that we were talking about the allocation, you can see the investment activity at the bottom of page 20 around that private markets movement into the private markets. But on page 21, you will also then see where we are with our strategic asset allocations. And obviously, as things fluctuate, your percentages will fluctuate. But now the fund is pretty much in line with its strategic asset allocation, or within its bounds of tolerances. We are still slightly above on our equities, and that because obviously that money is waiting to go into what we call the alternatives or the private markets, and you can see where we're balanced at that particular side. So again, I'll just stop there to see if there's any particular questions on those items.
Don't see any hands raised, Matthew.
Okay, so that really covers the bits about investments. Moving on then to governance and operations, and I think we'll spend maybe a bit more time on this. On page 22 of your report, covers consultations. We've had a bit of activity with regard to consultations that we've been awaiting for the last few years from central government on. The first one in relation to McCloud and the remedial actions and requirements that we were expecting on that. We had to have regulation in place by the 30th of September. That is now in place. We are now waiting for further guidance and actually then the timeframes around McCloud. So even though we now have some of those regulations, it's not an immediate, resolution. We will now be in the planning stage to actually deal with that, and we can talk a little bit about that later when we look at the business plan, because it is obviously one of the core projects that we have. The second consultation which came through was around the future of investment pooling, or next steps on investment pooling. That consultation was launched and it closed a few weeks ago. I can't remember the exact date, the 20, whatever it was. I think, the end of September, wasn't it? I think, or early October.
End of October.
That was it, October. We did produce a response. So a response was taken to committee a proposed response which they did agree to. That consultation response is on page 59 to 64 of your pack, so you can see what was submitted back to central government. I think high level, from a Brunel perspective and our partnership of which we are part of within Brunel, there was a lot within that consultation that we feel that was more than likely not relevant to us in terms of pooling listed market assets. We have that already. The fund is 98% invested via Brunel, so we already conform to some of the requirements that are needed. One of the areas of concern that they are talking about within the consultation is a pool scale size of £50 billion and above. Obviously, our partnership at the moment is only valued at around £36 billion. So, as a collective of 10 funds, that was that one area of the consultation that obviously we wouldn't be able to comply with if that was to come through. I think what we did was raise some issues around why that £50 billion was in there. Would it mean that we would incur further transition costs? So the costs we've already prescribed through. And obviously, as when we first went into Brunel, it was based on very much a road-based business case, and actually there was evidential cost savings that we could tangibly cover on that. We would obviously need to be able to see that to actually influence why the £50 billion would actually be in place. So there were some concerns raised around that and the viability and the rationale for that within that consultation response. So that consultation response has gone in. We will now await the government's response in time. I'm not sure, I'll be honest, I'm not sure if we will get a response this side of any general election. I don't know will be the answer to that one. I think there's a number of things that we are still awaiting consultation on in there as well on central government desks. As I said, the response to TCFD, the 95k cap, if you remember that, and as well good governance and the good governance review. So that there is a lot to be considered within there. But I'll stop at that point, Sean, and see if there's any questions on the consultations or any views from the board on the response that has been provided.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Questions on the consultations? Noting we can pick up McLeod later under the business plan item. Again, I can't see any hands, Matthew.
Okay.
If your reports are brilliantly written, or you're not so positive today.
I will take the former on that one, Sean, absolutely, on that side. So moving then on to fund administration and key performance indicators. As you remember at the last meeting with the board, we talked a little bit about KPIs and performance and a report that had gone through Pensions Committee in respect of resources for the team, a review of the KPIs that have been done and a report that we took to committee with recommendations, a report that was provided by Aon and the recommendations we put together as officers on that side. And one of those areas that we focused on was about the reportable and the measurable KPIs that we were operating to. And there was a period where we said that we would go and revise the way that we looked at providing those KPIs during that period of time. On page 65 of your reports is how those KPIs are being produced, and this is a KPI for the quarterly performance for the 1st of April through to the 30th of June. So we are presenting this in a slightly different format to previous. It is now benchmarking against the new sets of KPIs that have been put in place for that period, for a period of time, which will be reviewed again. I think it was about 18 to 24 months time on that side. But also what we did do was actually then re-baseline when we look further down shortly in terms of case completions over a rolling 12 months. So we actually get a little bit more clarity on that side. So as you can see where we're sat with the KPIs on page 65, hopefully pictorially actually just showing you obviously the red line where that KPI date is, and then the volume of activity in cases that occur either side of that line in terms of volumes and numbers, and above that with the overall percentages above on that side. The one thing that I would say to the board, as we said to committee as well, we have two levers to improve our performances. One is about processes and IT and the use of information technology to enhance our processes. And the second one is obviously resources and the people to actually do the work. Now, thankfully, obviously we were supported by committee in terms of resources, but to actually generate those resources into the team takes a period of time. Obviously, a recruitment process takes its time. And then also what we do have from that as well is then a training requirement. And the LGPS is a fairly complex beast in terms of the regulations that it has. So it does take a period of time to actually onboard new staff and upskill them to the point where they are then adding that value through. So it was something that we articulated previously, that this was going to be a marathon, not a sprint, in terms of where we are with that KPI journey, albeit that we are not taking our eyes off the delivery of the service that we can try and achieve to our members as we move through those processes. We'll talk a little bit about what's going on with IT shortly, and where we are in terms of that process, as well as then obviously the resources that we are bringing in. And we're on a major recruitment exercise at this moment in time, and we are making progress on that particular area, but still at this moment in time, getting bums on seats is still an issue for us. So this will take a bit further and a bit longer time. If you look at page 66, it gives you a trend analysis over a rolling 12 months of where those performance lines are, and you can obviously see where you get those peaks and troughs coming through. And then on page 67, because I think this is also very key that we actually look at, is also the trend analysis of the case volumes over that period of time as well. So those two things are intrinsically linked. And as you can actually see, even from April 2021 to now, the amount of processing that the team is actually having to do is increasing exponentially ongoing as well. And that's really the negative issue, where you have the KPI slightly moving down, because we haven't yet got those resources in place to deal with those increased volumes moving forward. We don't ever see those volumes actually reducing. The way that the workforce is nowadays, people come through and move. We were talking in the office the other day. I think in local government, it's unlikely now that people join local government and stay for 30 or 40 years for their entire career. The workforce is now more transient on that, and every time, obviously, you are moving a member through, they leave a liability within the fund, and then you have a replacement and it becomes a new member. So our membership numbers are always increasing. So how we deal with that is actually really important. But this will give us hopefully a good analysis to be able to track. And as we then bring those resources in, we should hopefully then start to see the impact of that on those KPIs. But as I said earlier, and as I articulated to committee, this is a marathon, not a sprint. In terms of that, because purely it's in terms of getting the individuals in, and then also then getting them the skills that are required on that particular side. So I will stop there and just see if there's any questions, particularly on those KPIs.
Gemma.
Thanks, Matt. So in terms of your I guess new structure, how many posts have you filled, and how many vacancies are you still looking to fill? Sorry, I've put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I've got Andy, who's actually leading on the budget. I'm not going to put Andy on the spot now. So the way where we've been so far, and Andy might have some numbers. I'll stall while he's doing. I'll look at some numbers on that one. The one thing that we obviously have seen as well is the ability where we have advertised posts that and it's a fantastic thing that our members of the team have been successful in achieving promotions through that as well. So those that have got knowledge. So that in itself is one of the key issues that we have in terms of the issue, that it doesn't actually bring a new resource or a new individual into the team until you get to that process of moving the chairs around, until you get to that point. So new staff coming in, we have brought in a number, about 4 or 5 pensions officers already. We have had 1 or 2 resignations along the way as well. So, you know, that kind of combats itself out, because obviously as we get to a bigger team as well, you just normally get that general staff turnover, you know, in there as well. Andy, I don't know if I delayed long enough for you to come up with some numbers for us.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the most recent recruitment exercise or most recent approval for additional staff, when we asked for more staff and that was approved by committee, we've only appointed to one of those roles so far, but the person we appointed to is an internal member of staff, so there's been no net increase in actual staff, and we're currently looking to backfill. So at the moment, I believe we're holding 7 vacancies basically within the team, which is probably, as a quick percentage in my head, is probably about 25% of my team basically are still held as vacancies. So we've got the approval, and we have the budget there to get up to the level of resourcing that we think we need, but we don't have those people in the door yet. And then obviously there's also that lag that Matthew referred to earlier in terms of actually training people and bringing them up to speed. And then similarly, once they're trained, while they're being trained, they're also being trained by other staff, which is taking them away from their work, which again sort of comes back to Matthew's earlier point about whilst it will take time basically for us to be up into a position where we're fully resourced, and we also have staff who are fully up to speed to be able to sort of deliver to the full extent of their role.
Am I right in thinking that at the moment we've got active about 4 or 5 job adverts active at this moment in time, or just closed?
Yeah, because of the way that
in respect of one of the, because they're combined posts, the pensions officer role, we can go out with one advert, but filling, I think it's filling of, is it 4 or 5 positions potentially, isn't it?
It's 3 or 4. It's we have approval for 3 at the moment. We're just trying to get internal approval to potentially appoint a 4th person, all off one recruitment exercise. But that's subject to we're interviewing 6 people, but potentially there's 4 vacancies. But that's obviously subject to there being 4 of the people we interview who are of sufficient standard that they're able to appoint. So if they are, we can appoint 4 people off potentially in a few weeks' time. But obviously, it may be less than that.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Is there a social media post that I can put on my LinkedIn to try and help you out?
There aren't, for the ones where I'm saying we're interviewing at the moment, that's already closed. So there isn't an actual active advert out right now. We are just about to put out another one, and that one should hopefully make its way onto social media. So that could be shared when it is there, but there aren't actually any other ones out at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, my questions are done.
We'll make sure that when those adverts go live, we'll share them with the board. And if you have social media channels to utilise, please
please do.
We will be doing the same thing as well.
Mark, you had a question as well.
Yes, indeed. The graphs on pages 66 and 67 obviously show variations over a time period, but I was wondering whether, for a sort of an easier grab of what's going on, the graph on 65 is absolutely fine, and it shows the percentages where we're against targets. Is it possible to have that expanded by, I don't know how you want to do it, on an annual basis or 6 monthly basis, so we're able to see any changes in our percentages against target, i.e., just looking at it at the moment, it could be that there'd been no progress, or there could have been, on the refunds, we might have slipped back quite significantly. And I just think it would be easier for us to understand looking at the numbers as opposed to the wiggly lines.
We can take that on board, Mark, and see what we can, what we do. Obviously, I think the issue with the KPIs is we'll be evolving, so we'll look at whether or not we can do that over more of a rolling period in terms of those, because that's obviously a quarterly KPI. whether we can do that analysis in that format over a longer period of time.
I mean, I don't think we
That
need.
would be the intention to build that, so we don't get those spikes that we used to get in terms of those
Sure.
KPI numbers.
I mean, from my point of view, I don't think I need to see the graph. It's just the list of percentages against target, just so we can see that, you know, whether we're making ground or not.
Okay. Yeah, we can look at how we can enhance it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Is that not what the graph on page 66 is purporting to show, Matthew?
It is, but I see what Mark said. He preferred to see the number rather than just the line, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, probably just to explain. I mean, the reason we set the graphs the way we did was that on a rolling 12-month bit of it is sometimes because from quarter to quarter, particularly when the volumes are lower, it can kind of go up and down, and it's almost harder to see the trend. So we did it. That's why we did it over a rolling 12-month period. But you know, I can take away and discuss with Matthew to look at the quarter versus quarter figures. But so basically, we're trying to have a smoothing effect, so you could have an idea of the longer term what was happening with the trend.
I mean, from my point of view, I don't think the quarterly figures are that important. It is, as you're showing on those graphs, the general trend, but it's just easier to see. I believe it's easier to see if you've got the percentage figures. So you can do it 6 monthly or annually. That it doesn't really matter to me. I just want to see what where we're heading.
Yeah, we can take that away and see if we can, you know, develop and you know, and bring you know, more information to light on that and present it maybe in two different formats and 2 different ways. That's not a problem.
Are there any other comments on the graphs or questions for Matthew on this bit? No. In that case, I think, Matthew, we're happy for you to move on.
Okay, so just following up then on the business plan. On page 24 of the page, but the full business plan is on page 69 through. Pretty much operating target on the business plan and what we actually said on that side of things. In terms of the quarterly activities moving forward, still waiting for the TPR single code of practice to come through for us to do that analysis and move forward. In terms of the core projects, the 4 core projects that were actually set, maybe we're spending a little bit of time just looking through those and those core projects. The first one on the responsible investment policy and the TCFD reporting. I know I touched on this slightly just before on that. It was scheduled to go to the September committee meeting, the responsible investment policy. We have slipped that slightly. That policy is still being drafted and generated. We have another half-day workshop for some analysis to be provided back to committee, which will then form the targets and the trigger points coming through, and that will be going to the December meeting. So it's a quarter behind, just on where we anticipated. A lot of that was around to actually getting the time in with committee in the workshop. We didn't really factor in the August shutdown in terms of meetings in there, which has just had that slight impact on that side. And as I said, with the TCFD reporting, we are looking to adopt that. You might well see that on next year's business plan as well, because it will be a key component part of that responsible investment policy moving forward, and our ambition to actually start to report more in line with TCFD. So we will be doing some gap analysis in terms of where the fund is at this moment in time, in terms of its information and its metrics on that responsible investment policy to what is needed to actually fulfill what we believe that TCFD reporting will be moving forward on that side. So the second core project was the review of the administration system contract. That is covered under a separate agenda item with a major update with regard to that. But basically, the tender exercise is moving forward. So we're operating that one to target at the moment. And I think we'll cover that a little bit later under a separate agenda item. The third one, pensions dashboard. That one, we're operating the target is predominantly on hold at this moment in time. As you know, the government have delayed now the staging dates for funds in terms of the pensions dashboard. I think they've realised this is maybe a much bigger thing to deal with, and you need to make sure that you get this one right. So as far as our progress is made, we did do some initial checks about our assessment and our readiness in respect of data. We will still continue to move forward with that part of it, but the architectural framework and the systems technology side of it is now on hold because obviously our staging date is now moved forward. So that one is on hold, but that will come back to us in the future. And then finally, obviously, is McCloud, the core project of McCloud. We now do have regulation with regard to McCloud in place. And what I might do is just ask Andy to give a very brief update of where we're sat with regard to McCloud and the remedial actions with regard to that, because I've got Andy here. Put you on the spot. Sorry, Andy.
That's okay. So, yeah, with the McCloud legislation, the final legislation only came into place in September, which was much later than pension funds had asked for. I believe the LGA asked for a year's notice, and we ended up at about 2 weeks instead. What we're doing at the moment is, because we're testing things on through our system to sort of make sure that we can run a lot of the functionality correctly in our pensions administration system, and making sure that all the functionality that our systems provider has built works properly. Once we finish that testing process, we'll start rolling out the remedy in stages, where we'll look first of all at the members who are still active or deferred, and get their records ready, so that when we run McCloud calculations on them, those work correctly. And then we will look back at pensioners who may be affected and may be retrospectively been underpaid, and then we'll look to correct those within 2024. However, we're still very much at that testing stage, and because we're in a similar position to lots of other LGPS funds, and speaking to a number of colleagues in those funds, they are finding some issues, some systems issues. So we're being cautious about going live and in terms of doing updates fully to the system, because of the risk that if we go a little bit too early, we may create a number of problems which create additional administration for us. So we're still being quite cautious at the testing stage. And from speaking to a number of other funds in the Southwest, I think most of them are in a similar position to us. Some of them are slightly ahead of us, some of them are slightly behind us. But we're still at that kind of assessment stage and still at that testing stage at the moment. We don't have a clear idea of some of the volumes yet, because we haven't quite reached that point. So I don't really want to guess at, for example, how many pensioners' records will need correcting, because we don't know that yet. The general expectation is that number won't be particularly high, but I don't really want to put a number on what it might be yet. But hopefully we'd have a clear idea of the next few weeks of a rough estimate of that.
Okay, thanks, Andy. I think I'll stop there after the business plan and see if there's any questions on the business plan, Joe.
Okay. Questions on any of the business plan? If not, I've got a couple of questions. But in terms of McCloud, have you got all the data to do the calculations, or are you going to have to go back to employers to ask for it retrospectively? And then the second question is, are you looking to do this within existing resources once you've got them, or were you looking for additional resources simply to deal with McCloud?
So on the first question, generally speaking, we have all the data, because we have nearly all the data we needed, because Gloucestershire always took the approach of of collecting hours changes the whole way through, so we didn't need to go back to employers and request and service breaks. We didn't need to go back to employers to ask that information again, as a number of funds did. So we were already in a fairly good position in that respect. There are some data which we need to go back and ask for, which is pay figures at age 65, because that's the date that the remedy applies for, which we wouldn't have normally asked for because it wasn't relevant. So that's only relevant for members who stayed in the scheme post 65. We need to go back and ask for figures at that date. But we don't anticipate that would be a particularly onerous type exercise. In terms of whether we need additional resource, I don't think we do specifically at the moment just for McLeod, but it will put. So the intention is to do the corrections using existing resource, because that's probably the best way to do it. However, by doing some of the corrections, it will put additional pressure on existing resource, and quite how much so is hard to tell at the moment, because I said we don't know how many records and things like that we need to correct, because we still need to do a bit more testing and a bit more analysis.
Thanks, Andy. Any other questions or comments on the business plan? Thank you. Happy to move on, Matthew.
Yeah, and so I'll just cover the last two then. In terms of the governance review work plan, predominantly we're coming to the end of that governance review work plan. There's a few items still on there, but we're still operating to time, apart from obviously the TPR Code of Practice review, because we haven't got that. It's very difficult to actually do that assessment moving forward. So some of the last items will be coming through later on this year and into 2024 from that side. So I think what that hopefully will do is looking at it is around the data improvement plan, as we've noted that around we'd link that to the core project of the pensions dashboard, and things like we were just talking about social media, the fund's identity, the fund's communications, how the fund communicates, the website. I'm not sure if board members have reviewed the one single page website we have within the council. It isn't particularly friendly. It doesn't convey the information of the fund, or even certainly some of the activities of the fund. So, we are maybe a little bit behind where others are in terms of engagement. And as we've seen, members and employers want more engagement about not just the benefit side, but also what's going on with the investment side as well. And I think that's a narrative that's really come to the fore over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, in terms of interest around what actually is happening with the investments and the money in there. So we do need to look to develop that. The actual governance work plan will due to finalise and finish all of those aspects through next year in 2024. So just really to highlight an ambition that we have. Is that once we get to the end of that process, because that would have taken us about 2 or 3 years to actually do that, is then to have a light touch review of where we are in terms of our governance, with all of the activity that's been done, and actually get a bit of a peer review in terms of where we are with governance, or maybe even Aon come in and do a very much an overview of what we've done, to make sure any of the activities and the changes that have come through during that period of time we've been embedding it are captured, moving ourselves forward. And again, what that might well do is put it in a position where we're aware that we will go into local election cycle in May 2025, is to allow that, obviously, as you may at that point have new committee members and a new committee, even with existing members coming back, but it's a reset and a recycle that actually they can have on board an overview of where that governance structuring is, and any activities and work that is needed for up on that side. So ultimately, governance review work plan operated to target, coming towards the end. And once we've done that at the end, because it's taken that length of time to come in, what we will be doing is looking to have a bit of a light touch refresh to see if all of those changes have been embedded properly and are actually effective moving forward, with any recommendations of any future changes. And then the last item on this report, which again fairly material, is the audit findings report from Grant Thornton. This is the audit for the year ending March 2023. Obviously, the pension fund is audited by Grant Thornton. They audit the accounts of the pension fund. They pass an opinion on the annual report. The approval of the audit findings report is captured by the Audit and Governance Committee of Gloucestershire County Council, because the pension fund accounts still form part of the council's accounts. So the pension fund accounts will not formally be signed off until the council's accounts are normally signed off. So obviously, but this is the audit findings report in respect of the pension fund. If I can take you to page 83 on the headlines on there, pleased to actually say that from a headline perspective, we are anticipating an unqualified position with regard to that in terms of the account. So really summarising the findings that they have on there. They still have some few outstanding items to test on that side, but materially there was no formal recommendations realistically that came through. The two areas that were carried over from the previous year's audit, which relate to controls within the accounting system, the SAP accounting system. As you know, we utilise the council's accounting system, so we are beholden to the operational aspects of the council in terms of that activity. The council is updating its SAP accounting software at this moment in time. I think we are on a go live date of March next year. So by the time we come through to the next audit of the audit of 22-23, we should be on a platform that is actually has remedied some of those issues, albeit they will more likely still be brought to the attention because they would have still been prevalent during 22-23 because of the systems that we are up on that side of things. So what you have in front of you is the audit, the draft of the audit opinion and the audit findings report. That was reviewed by committee, and they have commended that through to Audit and Governance Committee on that side. Just to note, this will be the last year that Grant Thornton will actually be auditing ourselves as the fund, and it will be moving forward. KPMG will be the new appointed auditors. They are appointed by the council and then through the Crown Services and the Audit Services procurement route, and we're awarded KPMG, and they will be auditing us moving forward. So all in all, a positive picture from the audit perspective in terms of the audit findings report, and it actually commends that the accounting position of the fund is true and accurate, and they will be looking to pass an unqualified opinion on the pension fund accounts. And at that point, Chair, I will stop there.
Okay. Any comments or questions on the last two items? So that's the governance or the report.
Perfect.
Getting background noise from somewhere.
Is that Jim? I saw Mark's hand raised.
I'll let Mark go first.
Thanks, Chairman. Just a little question which relates to page 104 of Grant Thornton's papers. Again, I think it's useful to be able to compare, and their proposed audit fee, 56,000, 56.5. It would be useful to know how that compares with previous audits. I don't know if that's something which can be asked for of the new auditors that are coming forward. Just again, so we can see where we're heading.
Yeah, I'm sure Nigel might have a view on that. I'm sure we know where we're heading in terms of fees. It will always be north on that side of things. Obviously, what I would say is that these are done through prescription, through the procurement exercise. So they are outside of our control, and I think they are prescribed within the contract that is in place with KPMG. But Nigel, thanks for joining us. It's perfect timing.
Yeah, perfect.
And you can actually, do you know how much it was last year?
Off the top of my head, I thought it was around 40,000, but we can confirm that to yourselves. I think, as Matthew said, it is a national agreement. The PSSA have a framework, and the audit bodies can apply for additional fees within that contract arrangement. So we're pretty much obliged to pay the fees as they are. We are anticipating that the fees under the new contract to be considerably more, in order to facilitate additional resourcing. So nationally, members of the board will be aware that the public sector audit are having quite a number of issues in resourcing and meeting the statutory framework within that. So the new contract arrangement does provide more capability for them to do that. And we had a brief discussion with KPMG yesterday, and they indicated that they've been through a recruitment program to ensure that they can meet the capacity of the bodies that they're now going to be auditing. So there is an upward trend on audit fees. Unfortunately, that's the arena that we're in. But we do make sure that they do engage with us, and that we, they're being as trying to ensure that the process of the audit is not drawn out and it's done as efficiently as possible. So there isn't a double whammy to us on our efficiency as an operational team.
Yeah, to your point, Mark, I think the audit fee the previous year was just circa 45, just over 45,000. I'm just picking that up from the annual report.
Right.
Yeah, so you can see where the trajectory has gone. But obviously, there was additional work in respect of the valuation that was on that bill from last year.
Yeah, I think it's just useful that there can be an explanation as to. I mean, I think we all understand that fees will go up, but if explanation, which might be, that so much extra work had to be done because of the introduction of new policies and so on, it just makes it simpler to understand. Whilst I've got the mic, is it appropriate now to ask a question on the PIRC LAPA document?
You can do. I think
Page 50 of our papers, the return and risk last 5 years, it refers to your fund shown in red. Well, I thought our fund was Brunel, and it's in purple. And I'm just wondering whether what they're saying is entirely accurate.
Yeah, so I think what it is, it's showing on that page, on page 50, is our fund. What they're showing here is the purple dots are the other funds that are in the Brunel partnership. So what those other purple dots will relate to other LGPS funds who are in Brunel. So the other 4 funds that I mentioned, and obviously the blue dots will be individual funds within London's pool. So it's just trying to keep it collected. So if I was one of our fellow LGPS funds within Brunel, our red dot would be purple and their red dot would be somewhere else on that chart, if that makes sense, Mark.
Okay, I've tried to identify which is the red dot. Perhaps it's the one between 8 and 10 on just
yes,
central line.
Yeah, so our fund is obviously the is slightly below the return expectation, but obviously slightly above the average on the volatility, which we talked about.
Yeah.
The reason we're up on the volatility is because of the equity mix that we have slightly higher. So yeah, what that's showing is that the purple ones isn't Brunel itself; it's the individual constituent fund that actually forms under the Brunel umbrella, and that's why you've got the different pots. So they're trying to mix up and actually show you what you can collectively draw out what the pools are doing, as well as the individual funds from that chart. If that answers your question.
Okay, no, that helps. It just wasn't that obvious because I think the colour coding isn't extreme enough to identify which is our fund, because it looks as if it could be mixed up with the Northern.
Yeah. So
Anyway, okay, that's
each one
great.
of those dots is an individual LGPS fund.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
Gemma, did you have a question?
So I was just going to make a comment on the audit report about the ITGCs, but Matt, you answered my question. But just, I guess, a comment I'd made when I was reading the papers the other day, I think sort of links in with what Mark was just saying. So, Matt, your report is super clear. And when I read it, I understand exactly what the key messages is. And I think the graphics and the tables that you use are exactly what we need. But the LAPA report, I found very, very difficult to follow. And I don't know whether that's just me, but I do look at a lot of numbers in my role and a lot of graphics in my role. And I found sort of the number of different graphs and tables quite confusing, and I couldn't necessarily follow a lot of the time whether the graph was telling me what the words were telling me. So I don't know necessarily whether that's something we can feed back, but I guess less colours, more explanation of what it's trying to tell us.
Yeah, I think there's two aspects to that, Gemma, and thank you for that feedback. I think one, we can feed that back to PERT, because even myself, I found sometimes that a little bit complicated to try and work out what actual the message.
Oh, good. Glad it's not just me.
Secondly, for myself as well, is to actually go, if we've got something along those lines, I could extract the important bits of information and put that into a cover report rather than actually providing the whole thing, so we don't get it clouded by kind of maybe misleading information on that one. So no, thank you for the feedback. We will go back to PERC and say, how that report feels to the reader, but it's also a point for us as well about how we then provide that information to yourselves and committee as well.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? If not, can I move us to the recommendation, which is at the bottom of page 26? And that's for the board to recommend, is recommended to note the position of the fund at the 30th of June 23, the governance undertaken and subsequent recommendations agreed by the Pensions Committee at their meeting on 22nd of September. Are we happy with that recommendation?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, thank you all. We'll move on then to agenda item 6, which is the draft annual report, which is on, I can't read that, it's too small for me, page
107.
107. Thank you, Matthew. You've got younger eyes than me.
I've got my glasses on, that's what it is.
I already have got my glasses on, I still can't read it.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, board members. I know there was a lot of content in that first agenda item, but backward looking. It might be that the next agenda items are maybe a little bit quicker to move through because they're looking at one specific thing. So on page 107 is the covering report for the scheme's annual report. Hopefully you received that electronically through from Andy and ourselves in terms of the draft report. We decided not to put it into the committee papers, obviously, due to the sheer size of the document. It is a statutory document that we have to produce. We are beholden to provide the information through guidance of what is contained within that report on that side. It is draft at this moment in time. We have to publish the scheme's annual report on or before the 1st of December of each year. Now, as has been the case in the past few years, we will be publishing, or the intention will be to publish the annual report on or before the 1st of December. But at that point, it will obviously contain, the anticipation is that it will be containing draft accounts, and it will not contain the formal audit opinion at that point, because the anticipation is that the council's accounts are not ready to actually be signed and completed by that time. It is anticipated that that will happen in early 2024. So, as we have done in the past few years, we will publish the annual report on the 1st of December or before the 1st of December. We will include an explanation of why the accounts are draft at that point, and it doesn't contain the audit opinion. And then once those accounts are formally signed by the council, we will then republish the annual report together with the audit opinion and the full account at that point in time. So we have made some changes to the report, in terms of that from a visual perspective. We had a bit of feedback from people around the size of the document, and then obviously sometimes opening it up and it taking a long time through people's internet connections or whatever to open up. So we have made it a little bit more user friendly in terms of the connectivity. So the imagery and that took up a lot of data size has been removed, so it's more of a functional document. But also we've used some navigation tools from an online perspective, so people can actually just hit a button and go straight to the section of the document they want, rather than wearing their fingers out scrolling down on the wheel of your mouse all the way through to those pages. So it does include obviously the accounts, as we said, and the main statutory policies, the governance compliance policies, funding strategy statements, investment strategy statements of the fund. It will be obviously issued to the employers, to the fund, and it will be made available to employees. And we don't produce printed copies, but they are available upon request, and we can produce a printed copy and send it out to any of the parties that wish to, and any of our key stakeholders when they come through. So committee reviewed the draft report, and they then agreed a delegation to the chair of the pensions committee for formal sign off, because obviously it's still draft at this moment, for us to be in a position to be able to publish on or before the 1st of December in the format that we can, depending upon where the council's accounts are at that point. So I'll stop there and ask if there's any questions on the annual report.
Thank you, Matthew. I'm sure we've all read all 188 pages, so I won't ask you to go through page by page. Anyone got any questions on the content of the annual report? Gemma.
Sorry, I'm very vocal today. No specific questions. Just congratulations, really, to you all that were involved, because I know these documents are enormous and they take a lot of time to make sure we get them right. So
I will ask Nigel to pass on those thanks back to the team, and Nigel as well, because he's really been driving this one forward for us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Or are we happy to note the current draft of the annual report?
Sorry, I was just going to echo exactly what Gemma was saying, that yes, I did read an awful lot of text, but what I did particularly was print out for myself the financial pages, which I thought presented a very clear picture, and it was very easy to look at those and understand the outcomes. The rest of the report is, I know, technical and probably requirements, but I thought the graphs and the financial sheets were very easy and very useful to read.
Thank you, Mark, for the feedback. Anything else in terms of questions or comments? If not, I think we're simply asked to note the current draft. Are people happy to do so?
Yeah.
Thank you. In that case, we can then move on to agenda item 7, which is the procurement of the pensions administration system. Is this you, Matthew?
Yeah, it can be for a moment, and I'm sure Andy might jump in on this one. So yeah, on page 109 of your packs is the report in relation to the procurement of the pensions administration ICT system. So obviously we discussed earlier that this is one of the core projects. The current contract was extended for 12 months, and it expires on the 17th of June next year, 2024. So what the report actually was done, which was approved by Pensions Committee, and the recommendations contained was approved by Pensions Committee, was fundamentally for a full procurement exercise to be run in respect of procuring a pensions administration system for a 10-year period, looking at a contract of 7 years with the ability to extend for a further 3. To make that procurement via a LGPS national framework that has been created specifically by the LGPS national frameworks in respect of ICT technology. It was also to include and procure the additional IT that was identified and agreed by committee to actually bring to the fore in terms of technology, which was the ability for provision of member self-service and member access to an online portal, and also to allow employers to be able to upload data in more real time rather than on the once-a-year basis. So actually looking to engage with our employers on a more ongoing basis, as well as our members in terms of the information and the way they can access their information in respect of that. It was obviously, from a core perspective, to still provide an administration system that will provide the calculations, to operate that in a hosted environment in terms of that technology, as well as then providing reportability and workflow systems and imaging systems within that, on that side. So within the procurement was also how we would actually look at quantifying the ratio between quality versus price, and the agreed split on that was a 70% to quality and 30% to price. The quality score will also include Gloucestershire County Council's mandated 15% in respect of social value, leaving the aspect of 55% on the actual quality of the services being procured on that side. So obviously let the board know the national framework that we are actually utilising. There are 3 providers on that national framework. It is a small cohort of organisations, but then ultimately there are 89 LGPS funds of which you are actually providing a services. So the pool of clients is actually small within that side of things. We are anticipating the contract in the range of 4 to 5 million for that 10 years, and actually, going through on that side. If I draw your attention to, I think, page 114, it just outlines importantly the timeline that we're operating to with regard to this process. So the committee meeting was the 22nd of September, where they approved the recommendations. The tender was issued on the 1st of October in line with the timeline, and we are now in that position and that period where we are waiting those tender responses to come back to us on the 17th of November, and then the evaluation to be moved through. We do have delegation for myself to actually, in consultation with the chair and the Section 151 officer, to actually move forward with the award. So we are anticipating that actually taking place in hopefully in December, with then the finalisation of the contracts in early January. And at that point, I will stop to see if there are any particular questions with regard to where we are with that core project and the procurement exercise, and how we're proceeding and moving forward with that. And I will also commend Andy, who has done a lot of work with our procurement team and strategic, and held the pen on a lot of this, and put a lot of time and effort into actually the ITT documentation that has actually gone out as part of this process.
Thank you, Matthew. Comments or questions from Mark?
Just one question on the decision and procurement. Does that include input from the chairman of the committee?
In terms of, obviously, what we will do is, once we've gone through the process, we will consult with the chair to explain the process that he's gone through. Obviously, the chair won't be part of the evaluation panel of it, but it will be to ensure that they can robustly challenge the processes that have been followed, and that has been appropriate. As similarly with the 151, we'll be doing that as well. So yeah, the chair of committee and the 151 officer will be consulted with the outcome of the process that has been followed to reach that outcome.
Excellent. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? No. We're asked then to note the recommendations and timeline agreed by the committee in relation to the procurement. Are we happy to so note? Yeah. Okay. Then I think takes us on to agenda item 8, which is the risk register.
Thank you, Chairs. Yeah, very briefly on this one, on the risk register. The risk register, the covering report starts on page 115. The full register is contained in your packs, starting from page 121. Fundamentally, quarter to quarter, the review of the risk register, there's been no additional or been no changes made to the risk register. We still have some elevated risks, at this time in terms of governance and operational around the resourcing and obviously the training and the knowledge and skills that it is highlighted on the governance. They remain elevated at this time, but apart from that, through the review, there was no further changes to the risk register. So I just commend the risk register and to yourselves as members.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Any questions or comments on the risk register? Don't see any, in which case we're simply asked to note the risk register and the current. Oh, John, you got your hand up.
Yeah, there's a couple of elevated risks which don't have any actions against them, and I wonder whether that was kind of are we just to assume that actions are being taken, or should we be noting particular actions? I mean, number 2, for example, number 8, particularly. If you look in the comment on further action and owner, there's nothing in there for those particular risks.
I think on number 2, I think which ones are we looking at on the governance risk on number 2? Is obviously it's the delivery